Shalom, everybody. My name is Ronen Shmueli. I'm director of the Rimon Jazz Institute here at the Rimon School of Music in Ramat HaSharon, Israel. And we're delighted to have Mr. Miguel Zenón, saxophone great, as our guest for the annual jazz workshops sponsored by the Moses family on behalf celebrating the life of Moses. Thank you for being with us, Miguel.
My pleasure, man. Really great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. I wanted to ask you, Miguel, what do you think about the influence of, let's say, global music, or let's maybe in particular Afro-Caribbean music, as you from Puerto Rican, from the great state of Puerto Rico, that I also have great friends from there. What is your opinion about the fact that, am I right? I mean, I can hear a lot of, global influences today in what's called like modern jazz.
Yeah, definitely. I think today more than ever, jazz has become a sort of global phenomenon. The first sort of steps into this were taken by people like Dizzy Gillespie and his collaborations with China Poso. And even before that, people like Jelly Roll Morton were exploring things that had to do with Latin American music because it was so immersed in New Orleans and that music. But I feel nowadays, jazz and the jazz world is very inclusive in terms of the kind of sounds that you find in jazz. I feel that not only in terms of musicians from all over the world, getting into the jazz scene and bringing their own sounds and their own traditions and putting that to the filter of what jazz is, but also you hear within musicians, American musicians, like you could think of any big jazz name, be it Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny, anyone, Wynton Marsalis. You'll hear in their music elements from Latin American music and music from Africa and Asia, and it's still jazz music. It's still like in the wider sense of the definition of what it is, it's just become a lot broader, the definition of it and what it encompasses. So I think jazz these days has been able to absorb music from everywhere and also outsource jazz into music from all over the world. So it's really become, widely global in that sense.
It reminds you said Jelly Roll Morton. He was saying that you can't play jazz without that Spanish tinge. When he was talking about Tresillo and he was talking about habanera and all that stuff.
So it's been there for a long time.
That's right. But you were also mentioning the scene. I mean, unfortunately today, relatively to other musics, jazz is kind of, let's say, relatively a small, more humble scene. Am I right that, I always felt that today the schools also serve as some kind of a scene, as a melting pot of, again, the world that we're talking about, global. The world is small regarding to that. Always thought that schools serve as some kind of a scene. I'm pretty sure that you today, when you're working with giants as yourself and others, you met before, you met in places that were meaningful in terms of school, or, those stories?
Yeah, no, I did had a great experience going to school, especially when I went to Berkeley and eventually Manhattan School of Music. I felt that the thing that I got the most out of that experience, besides, them being great schools and having great teachers and great facilities, etc., was the fellowship that I was able to get to with my peers at the school. Not only in terms of the friendships I created, but I feel that microcosm that is the scene at the school, which is very different from the real thing. Of course, It's like another thing, but when you create this, when you're able to fellowship and exchange ideas with a group of people that are all pretty much in the same boat, trying to go for the same thing, a lot of the same interests, a lot of the same goals, and pursuing the same things. It could be really inspiring. And I remember being at school, specifically at Berkeley, early on, and just running into all these amazing musicians who were my age, most of them a lot more advanced than I was. But just being around them and talking to them, listening to what they were practicing, what they were playing, I was inspired, you know. And you're inspired. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing when you're inspired by your peers, and that's one thing about music and about jazz music in particular, is music that's it's meant to be played as a collective. You know, it's not individual music in that sense.
Right.
You know, people will get their chance at the spotlight here and there, but in a way, jazz is music that's meant to be played with others.
Like clearly social
Yeah,
music.
yeah, it's social music. So that idea of you kind of learning with other people and you know, going through the motions together, I think it's pretty essential. And it continues even when you get out of school and you start playing with other bands. You know, that sort of idea still continues. It extends into other things, but it's part of what this is.
That's beautiful. I mean, it feels for me like basically you're talking about we're all like students of the music, whether it's like in classroom or like after hours
Yeah, definitely.
with the peers. So the thing of being a student of the music, I think that we can connect this to the fact that, I mean, to be a musician is like a holistic thing, if that's the word. I mean, it's being a performer, but at the same time, maybe a composer, an arranger, and an educator. Basically, all the things that you're doing. How do you see yourself as a musician? Is there something that you define as? I mean, the word itself is pretty big. I mean, I'm trying not to think loudly right now. What's your take about being a musician? You could put it in words, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely these days, you sort of it's sort of logical for musicians to have their foot in many different places at the same time. You know, being a performer, but at the same time, writing your own music, producing your recordings, teaching. It's become more and more part of the everyday life of musicians. Even I could say, as compared, and when I talk to, you know, musicians who are from other generations, and when you compare this to what it was 20 years ago, it's very different. You know, most musicians that wanted to play, they basically just played. They didn't have to do anything else, or weren't interested in doing anything else here. I think nowadays, with the dawn of the age of the independent artists, you know, and you being able to call your shots and really decide what you want to do, it's key for an artist to be able to be eclectic in that sense, be able to do a lot of different things, and the education factor is key, because now more than ever, jazz has found its niche in the classroom, you know, and there's really a really important presence of jazz in schools all over the world, you know, and most musicians my age and a little older, a little younger than me, will find themselves teaching, and while being performing and writing music, they'll find opportunities to share experiences with others, and I think that's the key because. You know, maybe I'll speak for myself, but a lot of the things that I learned about music and about playing and understanding music are things that, even though someone might have passed some information into me, I've sort of figured it out inside my head on my own, in a way. You know, you kind of have to find your own logic to be able to understand things, and it's a pretty powerful experience when you're put in the position when you have to explain to someone else something that no one explained to you, really.
Wow.
You know, that you figured out on your own.
Right.
So when you sit down with a student and you're trying to have them go through the same process you went through on your own, it helps you sort of understand it even better, in a way. It kind of like helps you learn relearn your information that you already had in your head. So it's sort of like a positive two-way experience. This thing about teaching.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about this music, basically. That's pluralism. That's what we call it. I mean, the best thing you can give a student is to make him think.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, at the time that we're doing this interview, probably YouTube or Wikipedia is full with new triad techniques over whatever.
Of course.
So you have to be yourself in whatever you're doing. And I think that leads me to ask you a question because, I mean, I can really hear, let's say, like, of course, groove-oriented, but percussion-oriented nuances in your music. For me, it's something that I less encountered with horn players. I mean, rhythm section players, okay, I get that, I mean, that they have this thing. I mean, I hope they have this thing, but maybe it can connect it to the fact that to play other instruments, because I'm sure you're familiar with percussion, and I'm sure you're familiar with piano. I can say that I'm always trying to do it myself, playing the bass or playing congas or whatever. Any advice regarding that? I mean, for someone who wants to start to research not his main instrument or whatever, how do you?
Yeah, most definitely. I think these days especially, exposure is everything, right? The more exposed you can be to things, the fuller that's gonna make your life, and the more complete a musician you're going to be. And I truly believe that, though. You know, I grew up in Puerto Rico around a lot of music that had to do there was percussive music. You know, so that was something that was pretty much in the air already, and I'm attracted to it just because it's in my ears. I can play a little bit, you know. Now I'm not gonna say that I want to play a gig or anything, but I can play. I can understand. I can understand it.
Yeah.
You know, I can understand a lot of it. And I can kind of nibble on the piano. What really got me into being able to get around the piano, again, not as a professional, but more like in terms of being able to use it in a practical way, was when I started to write music. I realized that I needed it, you know.
Right.
I needed to be able to understand an instrument that wasn't like my own, which is a linear instrument. You can only play one note at a time. So I wanted to be able to play an instrument that would where I could play more than one note at a time. There was an instrument that would give me another sonority, and it's an instrument that's so central to music in general. So that really helped me, and also as I got more into teaching and playing with students and lessons and stuff like that, I started like learning tunes and being able to accompany students, and it's funny how it goes. A lot of things you do out of necessity, like I feel like, okay, let me just try to figure this out. But I really believe that's made me better. It's made me better in every way. My ears, my conception of music. And I feel not only with instruments, but in terms of being exposed to other types of music, being open-minded about music in general.
Of course.
I think at least in this genre and a lot of other genres too, it's easy to be close-minded, and say, okay, I'm just gonna listen to this, or right. that other music sucks or whatever, just because it's pop music or because this and that. I think it's important to be open-minded and to be able to soak as much information as possible. I mean, you were talking about all this information being out there so easily accessible, right. And this is the era of like overload of information. But at the same time, it's important that we're aware of what's out there, because then we have more to choose from, and it can make us more well-rounded, I think.
That's beautiful. I mean, and you're talking about Puerto Rico. I know my Puerto Rican friends. From one hand, it's always groove-oriented, but they all can sing. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So I really feel also this lyrical side in your playing. Do you sing from time to time, even to yourself? I mean, when you write a melody, you try to...
Yeah, definitely.
To have this song alive.
There's definitely a side of that. I think when you're thinking about a music that's folkloric, any kind of music, right. The singing is sort of like the central part of it, because that's the human instrument,
that's right.
So it's always going to be coming out of that, and it's important to understand that. I mean, even when I play my instrument, I'm always thinking about that quality. And I think something we all strive for as instrumentalists, is to get to that point where we actually have that connection. That's the right. connection that we have with our voice, we want to have that with our instrument. That's kind of what we practice, what we strive for, So it's important, I think, for me to keep that in mind, vocal connection, not only in terms of the idea of it being lyrical, but also the actual physical connection to the voice, right?
Gotcha.
And the type of control, the type of, connection that we have with that instrument, and trying to extend that into how it feels to play another instrument,
That's beautiful. That leads me maybe to conclude. You're one of the, for my opinion, one of the most gifted musicians out there.
Thank you, man.
My pleasure. And would be great, maybe to conclude with, like a little tip for, emerging young talent that they're coming. I'm sure everybody's confused, again, those days that, musician, career-wise or whatever, or even, when people frustrated in the practice room.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a little tip for people watching this video.
Yeah. Well, I get asked this question a lot, and the way I think of it is that when we as artists, our road is not always going to be clear. You don't really know for sure what's going to happen within a year or 2 years. You're sort of like, building up the road as you go in a way. But you do have a responsibility within yourself to be, sort of like the best you can be. And that's your responsibility, and if you're an instrumentalist, then your responsibility is to be on top of your instrument.
That's right.
And if you're trying to play a specific type of music, jazz, rock, or funk music, or whatever it is, then you have to study that music, get into the tradition, build it up so it's within you, that whole thing. But I do believe that opportunities, and speaking more in terms of how you actually get to the point where you can actually say, I can make a career out of this. I can be happy with where I am professionally as an artist. Opportunities are going to come at some point. There's going to be a point where opportunities are going to present themselves. And the key is to be ready for those opportunities. So my job, the way I think of it, and our job as artists, is to prepare ourselves for opportunities. So make sure when a door opens, then you're actually going to be at your best, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. Because you don't want to look back on that and say, if I had been more focused and I worked harder when that door opened, I could have gone through it instead of letting it pass by, So it's the way I think of it. It's like, make sure that you're on top of your instrument, on top of everything you need to be preparing, so when that opportunity comes, you can actually take advantage of it,
Can I just, in a sports term, call it clutch?
Yeah, you could say clutch, for sure.
Thanks, man. Thank you, Miguel, for sharing wisdom and love.
Thank you,
and,
man.
It's been a real big pleasure. Thank you,
My
man.
pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
תודה רבה לכולכם, ותהנו מהווידאו.